Okay, good afternoon. My name is Trevor Bodie. I'm an architecture critic, curator, troublemaker from Vancouver, and I'll be chairing this session, which is also a kind of book launch of a very unusual, I think a very important book on housing. There's a lot of bad books on housing and a lot of housing books that don't deal with housing. This one does. So I'm not the author. I wrote the introduction and I kicked around some editing ideas, but it's really the book of Sasha and Johanna. So I'm going to set things up for a few minutes, and then we'll ask most of the architects to come up and give you a little more detail to drill into the book called Platform Middle. Afterwards, if you're interested, there will be a book signing out at the bookshop. And if you're going to buy one, do it quick. There's exactly 20 copies of this book on this continent, and they will go in minutes. So if you're interested, grab them fast. Okay, let's get started. I feel obliged to start this session with a public safety announcement. If you're here expecting metaphysically tinged talk about housing as sculpture, the kind of stuff pumped out along the SciArc to Harvard to AA Access, this is the wrong session for you, so you can leave right away. Instead, we are celebrating a new book and a creative practice dedicated to rethinking modest housing from first principles. First principles that are written about and drawn out in the book we're launching here today, which is entitled Platform Middle. And here it is in its glory, and you'll hear more about the book in a moment. Now, just before we jump into this, a local vignette to explain this public safety announcement. The World Architecture Festival has put most of us jurors and speakers up in the newish but pre-pandemic hostelry, which is also housing from somewhere along that SciArc to Harvard to AA Access. And it was designed in part by Philippe Starck. The hotel is called M Social, which sounded to me like a virus when that WAF told me I'd be staying there. Hey, Jeremy, old bean, did you get your M Social jab yet? You know, what is it? My room there is 3 meters wide, 3 meters long, but has a 4-meter high gabled ceiling. What is called by Canadian realtors as a cathedral ceiling. Winnipeg, where Sasha and Johanna are from, is about as far away from the SciArc to Harvard to AA Access and housing as is possible without freezing to death. And our featured architects designed shared dwellings that are a great deal more necessary and interesting than many of those. This session will investigate the missing middle of housing, the kind of housing without cathedral ceilings, spiral stairs and plate metal, or windows cleverly situated to illuminate footwear. Speaking personally, it's a pleasure to be here, even more so with my friends, collaborators, and fellow Canadians, Johanna Hermy and Sasha Rodolovich of the fantastically creative and underlauded firm of 5468796. Now, to get this out of the way, why that number for the name of an architectural practice? Like many, I thought it was a shameless bit of marketing, a quick telephone contact to get work. I was wrong. It turns out that 5468796 was the legal registration file number for the then new architectural practice, when the founders could not agree on another name. So they are the numbered practice. I've known them since they were students at the University of Manitoba, where I taught briefly but returned for crits. And my role here today as introduction writer in the book and friend and promoter of these guys, I'm setting the stage by showing some quick images of 4 of their works that have been privileged as an architecture critic to write about on the pages of first the Architectural Review of London, the mothership of this very conference. Architectural Review spawns off WAF and now supports it. Architectural Review of London, and then further articles on their work in the Canadian Architect magazine of Toronto. And you can find these buildings, my reviews, online for free at both places. Okay, now let's get the slides up. Oh, here. Ah, cleverly hidden. Okay, this is the book, which you see is in a slipcase with 4 independent, editorially autonomous sections. Johanna will be talking about it in a moment. This is the first building by 546-8796 I wrote about. It's a housing project on Winnipeg's Grant Avenue called Block 10. All of their projects have a number associated. To me, it's a fantastic interrogation of the idea of the walk-up wood frame apartment building, which is built all around the world. Now there are some problems with wood frame walk-up apartments. Historically, Winnipeg has a high concentration of Eastern European immigrants. So the hallways of walk-up wood frame apartments always smell and forever of boiled cabbage. Amazingly, even though more recent occupants are immigrants from Afghanistan and Venezuela, they still smell of boiled cabbage. In a few moments, co-designer Sasha will describe how their design approach to Block 10 in detail, but suffice it to say that it entirely eliminates those boiled cabbage corridors. It gives every unit an entranceway on grade and rethinks how services are woven into buildings. The next project that I wrote about is a flying saucer disc. Project is called 62M for Mother Housing. It's a 2-story cylinder of flats jacked up on columns set over open to freezing open air parking. Here you can see their very clever unit planning and their creation of a landmark with staggering views at the heart of one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, where low land costs made the innovative architecture possible. And I've got a note here for the Singaporeans, Indonesians in this audience. Those are not scratches on the photograph that you see here, but something we Canadians call snow. Okay. The next project has a budget and a floor area equal to all of their previous work combined. This is the last parking garage ever to be built in the city of Calgary, and it was built with an eye to the future. It is future-proofed, and the design is adaptable into converting the trays of parking into housing, workshops, or offices. So they will tell you why this came to be, but I think it's an incredibly innovative project. It's for a time when even Calgary, center of our oil business, converts to other energy sources. The last of the 546-8796 buildings I've written about, and they're all in the book, by the way, of course, is the newest. This is in Winnipeg on a riverside location. It is a century-old brick pump house, water installation, which has been converted into retail, restaurants, office uses. But above it, and very cleverly, they've inserted some really, really interesting housing floating above and around it. And I think it's a kind of paradigm of of adaptive reuse of historic building. Okay, enough of me. So now a quick introduction to Johanna Hermy, I've been distracted to say, who will get into more detail about their book. Johanna is a native of Finland who came to rural Manitoba on a high school exchange and basically never went back to Europe to live. Her awards are enormous. Her teaching at Cornell and elsewhere, innovative, her intellect sparkling, and of course, her clothing constantly and solely black. Two things to note. While most architects shun such civic duties, she's the former president of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce. Now, how many architects put their names on the line to enter politics or to serve the business community? There's one in the room, but there's no more. I'm happy to announce here today that Johanna Hermy has just been named the next president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, Johanna Hermy.
All right, Trevor, come back. Oh, okay. He's coming back later. All right. Thank you, Trevor. And did you take the clicker? Thank you. So, yeah, we're here for our new book. Title is shown here, and it's been a 4-year labor of love. As many of you know who've done a book before, much more work than you thought, but on a topic that we really care deeply about, multifamily housing that is perhaps seen as the most mundane of the architectural typologies, but one that touches people most on when they go about their everyday lives. And first, though, 546 began in 2017, so almost 16 years ago in Winnipeg, Canada, and somewhat serendipitously, we got into housing in our first year of existence. And since then, we have completed thousands of suites, and many more are in the works. And through that effort, we've learned a lot of strategies aimed at improving the end outcome for the user while maintaining client performance and a fairly ambitious architectural agenda. The book itself consists of 4 parts, and more importantly, it is not intended to be a monograph of our work, but rather a toolkit or lessons learned aimed at students and fellow architects engaged in housing architecture. And it all started as a result of a symposium that we organized as the visiting professors at the College of Architecture at the IIT in 2019. We invited a number of experts from across North America to discuss the particular challenges facing architects working in this sort of private sector, profit-led set of parameters. So volume 1, the middle, outlines the contents of that symposium and its conclusions. Macro deals with issues of policy, politics, finance, regulation that drive and shape the production of multifamily housing in North America, but aren't directly in the hands of the architectural profession. These are issues that we think any architect engaging in housing design must be aware of, but have very little control over, unless, of course, we get directly involved and take the effort to do so. Micro is then the design issues that we can and do affect, the tricks and tools of the trade that can be deployed to increase the quality. And finally, modeling is the reference catalog of our own work for where these lessons appear. We were inspired and provoked by the discussions that took place in Chicago with all of our collaborators, shown here. And the book expands on our hands-on research, working with challenging economic and environmental circumstances, and using the firm's built works, concepts, master plans, and community projects as a foundation for the strategies that we discuss. And it will be released by Arquine just about now. We have the first 30 copies available at the WAF today. And then today we'll touch on some of the governing issues outlined in the macro book, and I'll talk about those, and then Sasha will focus on the sampling of the strategies that we're providing in the micro. So housing affordability in North America and many parts of the world elsewhere has reached its crisis point. It's against the backdrop of rapid urbanization and exhilarating environmental emergency that we really need solutions for city building that are more socially and economically sustainable, as well as multifamily housing that's more equitable and livable. One could also argue that the attention in our part of the world needs to be in the middle of the housing spectrum, the focus of the book, for the reasons that this typology, that's largely lacking in North America and is much needed to create human-scale, ground-oriented city fabric and people-first places and spaces. Reasons for the housing crisis are many-fold and have not only an economic impact, but also a social and environmental impact. And on average, the typical North American occupies about 4 times as much space per person as the average Asian, and twice as much space as the average European. So the expectations are vastly different and have vastly different impact on our collective environment. At the same time, as many of you know, buildings are responsible for 33% of the global energy consumption and nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, further highlighting the huge responsibility we all share. Another key reason is the continually climbing housing prices is the commodification of housing. In Canada, largely because of the federal taxation changes in the early 70s that rewarded ownership speculation and ended the support for large-scale purpose-built public housing projects. Essentially, it occurs when housing is treated as a commodity, a vehicle for wealth and investment rather than a social good. And as of 2020, the value of global real estate was approximately $270 trillion and rising, with residential real estate comprising 75% of that. Furthermore, 10% of Canadians live in the core housing need, and nearly 30% of both Canadians and American households are cost burdened, which means that over 30% of their household income is used on housing. But the main reason, above all else, in my opinion, our opinion, is that an overwhelming majority of the total housing stock in both countries is produced and owned by the private sector and driven by profit. Only less than 1% in the US and less than 4% in Canada of the total housing stock is owned by and managed by public entities, compared to our European counterparts where that same number tends to be in the mid-30s, and yet somehow we keep thinking that we can solve the problem by doing the same thing. In our minds, then, the basic form of architecture of multifamily housing in North America is generated as a result of 3 basic parameters: profit and efficiency, which results in deep floor plates and suites, a lack of governing policy, like let's say in Sydney they have a flat design code that dictates how much sunlight has to reach the end of a suite. We don't have any of that. And the requirement for 2 exits, which again governs a lot of how the architecture gets shaped. Some or none of which are present in other parts of the world. So this is the framework that presents us a series of challenges for architects hoping to achieve fundamental quality of living for that end user. And efficiency targets must meet or exceed the typical minimum of 85% rentable or sellable square footage of the total building area. And the traditional outcome of this pro forma objective is very deep units with limited access to natural light and operable windows. So really, it boils down to always this battle of the perimeter, how to maintain access to natural light and ventilation while maintaining dwelling size and efficiency of the public spaces. What design solutions are there then that we can and have control over that can be deployed to improve the outcome within this set of framework? We've outlined about 50 micro solutions that allow us to carve more room for quality and architecture and provide savings that can therefore be invested elsewhere in the project. And none of the individual strategies or solutions are especially groundbreaking and may seem rather obvious in some instances, but however, we hope that gathering and sharing this learning in one place might help a colleague or someone just starting out in the design to hit the ground running, and as a result be able to spend their time providing the quality and innovation that's desperately needed to make mid-scale multifamily an attractive and attainable choice for more North Americans. The modeling part of the book, the particular strategies in the toolkit that are presented through the lens of our own project, consists of 20 housing projects and 2 master plans. And all of the projects presented are analyzed through comparable statistics covering anything from cost per square foot to density per acre, use, efficiency, unit type, sizes, number of stories, and construction type. And we hope that the modeling or catalog can be referenced simultaneously while reading about the particular architectural strategy in the micro volume. And with that, I will turn it over to my partner, Sasha, who's getting less of an introduction here, but anyway, he's awesome, to take us through some of the toolkit samples.
Yeah, now that you've used up all the time and spawned this on me without notes, They just decided I should present about 2 hours ago. So as Johanna said, the tools that we've tested through real-life projects are really the discoveries that we found contesting building codes, contesting zoning regulations, contesting politics, NIMBYism, and so on. And each one of them has sort of affected one or most of those elements that generally shape the way we practice around multifamily housing. The toolkit itself, which we again hope becomes something that architects can use to start from and to build from, as we find in Winnipeg with the lack of precedents that we encounter in our daily lives. Our search for the right response for the project always has to start at the very base, so we're hoping that this book elevates that conversation. So we go anywhere from critical opportunism to adaptability and resilience. I should be changing this slide, shouldn't I? To building in between. There's a long lost and forgotten art of city building when it comes to building in North America, and especially when it comes to multifamily housing and the livability as well. Each one of the projects that I'm going to go through is going to take us through a one or a multiple of strategies that we've employed on that project. Trevor brought a Block 10 up as first of the project that he's written about. The real interesting aspect of it is elimination of the corridors and reconfiguration of units into what we call a Chinese puzzle, which you can see here. The idea being that each one of the units, instead of facing and having a singular aspect, has at least a dual aspect. 8 out of 10 units in the project reach a corner, so they have a corner aspect as well, and each one of them has three spaces, one located on each one of the floors. So therefore, the variety within the space becomes such that the tenants themselves have ways to organize their life within architecture. This, we think, brought a value when it comes to cross-ventilation, brought a value when it comes to multiple aspects of a unit, and brought a value when it comes to efficiency for our developers. At grade entrance was one of the primary ways of addressing the ways the building meets the street with in a form of a townhome, which is not as common on a multi-story project, and then the way that is again brings value to the bottom line is by reducing the amount of corridor space that one has to build once the access is provided at grade. We take that same logic up to the multi-story buildings with use of both open-air corridors and the skip-stop corridors that allow us to have fewer corridors on projects where we are actually fighting for more footprint and site. This project itself is located on a 40-foot wide site, and our approach was to, while creating a single-aspect suites, employ the skip-stop corridor, which then allowed us to reduce the amount of corridors that we had to build. So we only have 3 corridors on a 6-story building, therefore maximizing the returns for our client and then shuffling those funds into architecture. The skip-stop corridor then we've employed on a series of other projects, and again, enabling the cross-ventilation, which is so uncommon in North America when we are facing the 2 exit stairs and the corridor that connects them. In housing, as those of you that work in the typology, there's a lot of indecisiveness when it comes to the development community in terms of the unit mix and suite mix and so on. So we've sort of deployed a strategy on our largest project up to date, which is about 200 units, where we've introduced something we call short-term flexibility. We were able to basically lifetime until the construction was complete, change the unit mix and the number of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units by introducing plumbing lines and by maintaining structural lines that will allow our client to change their mind up until construction or while the construction was going on in the project. One of the first projects we've ever gotten into dealt with this idea of programmatic flexibility, where the project itself consisted of 7 dwellings, but with the addition of 4 flexible spaces that could be owned by any one of the units that surround it. And by doing that, we've enabled the life of the project and tried to extend it from being a first entry-level housing to something that could house families, through the expansion into the flex space, the garages, the studios, and so on. And so that evolution of the space was quite interesting to see, and the use was what makes the project more sustainable and maintains the community. Display plan, as Trevor promised, the units are smartly planned in a way that we're able to reduce the amount of perimeter where we didn't need it, such as the corridor deep into the building, and increase it where we did need it, which was access to light. So the display plan itself allows us maximized views out, about 21 feet or close to 7 meters in perimeter where glazing is, but only down to 7 feet or 2 meters at the very corridor. So while these units might appear as counterintuitive, the cross ventilation that was gained through that and the expansion that one experiences in the space next to the windows is quite significant. And I think lastly, or second last, is the idea of introduction of a light well, very common principle in the housing for about 100 years ago, where I grew up, but this permitted us to, again, produce cross ventilation in a building that's mid-block building that's generally difficult to do so in a corridor and two-stair configuration, and where we're able to get 2-bedroom units that have light and as well as access to fresh air. Additionally, again, I'm going to go through a bit into the weeds here, is the project that on surface does not appear as modular or does not appear as a rigorous architectural exercise, where we were able to combine structural, what we call hollow core planks in Canada, prefabricated structural floor planks that come with holes in order to reduce their weight. However, we're able to use them for air displacement and air distribution throughout the building, therefore eliminating most of the ductwork in the building itself. Everybody who's tried to work in housing has encountered this idea of stacking ad nauseum windows that belong either to living rooms or bedrooms and balconies that then definitely define architecture. And one of the most difficult things when we approach any housing project is understanding of how that repetition will manifest itself on the outward experience or outward appearance of the building itself. On the 62M project, we've sort of what we worked and what we understood is there's the plumbing lines that define that lining of things, and that we would have much more freedom on the outside and we were able to decouple the facade from what happens inside the suite. So by lining up the plumbing lines, we were able to switch the units back and forth and therefore create a variation that took away from stacking that would actually break up the cylinder itself. And then as we get to the end of the toolkit, we get into the nitty-gritty of it and the ideas of using things that are not supposed to be used for things that we use them for, such as in the pump house, where we've ended up using off-the-shelf steel studs that you can recognize this as a way of supporting the glazing system, therefore minimizing the amount of glass, or cutting it in half, in essence, by going to thinner glass. Again, moving away from proprietary installation methods and techniques. So all of these help us in doing something that is very important and very close to our heart, which is to treat housing not as a commodity, but treating it as a human right. I think that was the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Johanna. We've got about 10 or 12 minutes here. We'll do a couple questions, and then I'll open it up to comments or queries from you in the audience. Johanna, this is an ambitious box, okay? There's an academic symposium at Crown Hall, Mies van der Rohe's building at IIT. There's modeling, which is examples of your own built work, a kind of mid-career monograph. Toolkit, which I think is pretty unprecedented in its range and variety, et cetera. Tell me, what is the advantage of bundling all of these types of publications into one? What do you get with all four in a box that you don't get with one by one every year for 4 years?
I guess the hope is, and I hope I explained it, is that it is really hoping to advance those strategies that we have in North America that we can use as architects that go beyond just understanding the issues that surround us and are in the hands of politicians and planners and so forth. But where does the architect fit, and how can they improve the outcomes, and where our responsibility lies, and trying to call architects to action to do better. And here's the stuff that we've learned. How can we add to this sort of body of understanding and work and continue to do better?
Well, I think that's really the point. Sasha, when you're dealing with housing, it's hard to know what to leave out. It is economics, it is planning, it is construction, it's materiality. It's the lives of people, their hopes and their dreams. It's all there. And housing, more than almost any other domain of architecture, has this complexity and range built into it. How do you know what to do when there's so many choices in so many realms?
In terms of writing a book or in terms of doing a project? In terms of the practice, but usually it's based on the constraints and your definition of what the constraints are, and then responding to those. And then it is rather curious to see how our practice has developed from smaller projects and the understanding that was built on those, lessons learned, and then successes or failures that we've encountered, and then trying to amp those up to larger projects. Because more we work with more sophisticated developers, less room there is for innovation. We're generally facing a really robust planning exercises in larger cities. They're requiring us to have all the answers on day one of the project, and far less opportunity for discovery throughout that project itself. And so then you have to come up with strategies that are robust enough to withstand all those processes that we go through. And then they are very commonly, as Johanna will be the first one to recognize, they're very commonly about reducing costs in an area where you can, and then shuffling the funds into something that improves the project, whatever that is. And that's what the toolkit is very much about.
Well, I'm hardly neutral in this, but I think what you've both attempted, and your colleagues, collaborators, and I'm one of them, have done is extremely unusual and extremely important in architectural culture these days. I know that teaching through the 90s and 2000s, et cetera, housing was always the poor sibling in architecture schools.
Well, look at the conference here, right? There's how many categories,
who wants to do housing? I want to do a house for a philosopher in a hole, or whatever, you know what I mean? Art galleries, yeah. So housing was always diminished and somewhat intellectually and as a challenge to designers. What are the arguments against that opinion? How do you get this pleasure in having a housing-oriented practice?
Well, I had this encounter with one of the, in a bar, a couple years ago, where a woman ran up to us and she said to us, oh my God, you designed my home. And I had no idea what she was talking about because I'd never met her, and unless I had forgotten, but I was confused at the time. And she was so excited. It turns out she was living in one of the social housing projects that we'd done a few years earlier. And she was so somehow taken, the fact that an educated professional architect would have taken the time to design a home that she felt really fit her. And that was a moment where it just sort of clicked of okay, well, this is the stuff that matters. And actually, we care about being involved in a broader spectrum of the world where design can make a difference. And it sounds maybe hokey and cliche, but that's really what it is. That's what drives us.
Well, the subtitle of the book is Housing the 99%. I think it's time to hear from some of the 99% of the people in the room. If anyone has a comment or a question, probably we're short on mics, just stand up and yell it out. There's a mic right there for anyone who needs it. So we crammed a lot of content in a short amount of time, but we'd welcome any of you. Oops. Otherwise, we'll chug along. What are you doing now? What are the new frontiers in your housing design that have emerged since you wrapped up editorial work on the book, about a year ago, I guess? What are the new horizons in your practice?
Well, we just completed 2 projects that are fortuitously located 1 block apart, and they're both studies or essays in different ways of doing a sort of mid-rise, seven-story buildings and packing density on sites that were probably slated for much lower density, and which is done through a variety of tricks, means, tools, and whatever you wish. They're listed in this book. The projects are in the book itself, but in a sort of non-built state. And they discuss a variety of again tools that were utilized. We just completed photography on one of them, which is the pump house apartments that you've identified, and well, there's many things there. What was really exciting through that experience was rediscovering some of the things that we decided to work on 8 years ago when we first started working on the project, having to do with experience of one arriving at their dwelling in a multifamily apartment. The buildings are, if you imagine, completely inverted from your typical expectations. There's no cabbage-smelling corridors in them, as they're all open air, and the open air enables us to do cross ventilation in the suites and in the buildings that have 2 stairs. So even in climate in Winnipeg that goes down to minus 40 Celsius and goes up to 40 Celsius, we've studied this on previous buildings and discovered that people actually don't mind that, given the qualities that they get out of it from the dwellings. So instead of having deep units without windows, we're in the bedrooms, deep in the units, now we have windows on both sides, which is sort of unprecedented in the mid-scale and high-rise housing. And
Want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add just that, and we've started a research project with LGA from Toronto, also looking at trying to prove that a single exit in smaller apartment buildings actually a viable and reasonable option for fire safety. So that would fundamentally transform the shape of architecture in our context, and so we're super excited about that, and seeing what cross ventilation, access to natural light would be vastly improved if that proposal goes through and is widely adopted.
But it's quite interesting.
Well, you've heard it here first, folks. The revolution has started. Single exit, not double exit.
But it's quite interesting how much that defines not only the shape but the quality of housing, right? So being right there. It's funny that we as architects, and that's one of the reasons we ended up writing the book, that we have to take charge of something that should, in one way, shape, or form, be coming from above, right? From politicians and from the forces.
Well, I think one reason why a lot of us love architecture and do it and keep at it is precisely the range and depth of thinking on multiple levels that are needed to do it. And I can think of few practices other than 5468796 who are really taking on the beast of housing production, quality of life, doing things with minuscule budgets and so on. So I'd just like to thank you so much for coming here and for launching the book. Johanna, can you tell us where the book launching is and what's next? And we can do questions there, by the way. There's a bookshop here.
Yes, the WAF book store just a little ways into the festival hall.
It's actually the Oro Publishers stand, right? It's doubling up as a bookshop.
Well, thank you all for coming. Anyone with follow-on will all be over there in a few minutes, and you can ask your questions there. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.